Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two professionals working in the mental health field get a chance to talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate their mental wellness while working in the mental health field. Today, I have a very special guest, someone who had reached out to me previously, and we've done an Instagram Live before. I'm joined by Kelsey Hoff. Kelsey, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me today. It's great to be here.
You, low-key, are one of my inspirations because when you were working on the Instagram, you just kind of put it out to a therapy group like, hey, I'm looking for people to join me who would be open to that. And we're like, this is weird for me, but I'm working on it. And I felt like very similar to that. I was like, oh, yeah, you just have to put it out there because there are therapists who want to do these things with you.
Oh, I'm so glad it was like that because I'm totally there too. And I was so impressed with how many people were like, I'll join you in that. And it's uncomfortable for me too. So yeah, doing that together.
Yeah, there must be like a subsection of us therapists who are introverts or bad at networking and just need little extra push to be like, hey, let's talk about these things we're passionate about.
Yes. Let's just own that it's challenging and then just do it together.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm super stoked that you're willing to talk with me today. Let's jump in kind of at like what brought you into the mental health field, just like I don't know, as much of a brief biography as you want to share. Like, how'd you kind of get into it? Were you always interested in it? Was it kind of like an all over kind of journey? Give us the broad strokes.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I always was interested in psychology and how people work. And I think that goes back to my childhood. I was always a very observant, inquisitive type of child that wanted to know why. Like why do people do what they do? Why does the world work this way? And I don't think I connected that to counseling or psychology until I was older. Probably in high school, I took some psychology classes, and it's like, yeah, this is the field, I think. Yeah. And then I went into university and ended up actually doing a major in religious studies because part of my interest was why do people believe how they believe and what kind of brings people to do the things that they do, and also the intersection between culture, theology, world religions, and philosophy. And so then I also minored in psychology and wasn't sure what I was really going to do with that. But then I moved to another city where there was a counseling program about 15 minutes down the road. And I wanted to do my master's in something practical. So I thought that counseling was a really practical field. And interestingly, I remember going into the program saying, I don't want to sit in a room and talk to people. Okay. So looking back, I don't really know why I chose counseling over social work, because I think that what I was actually looking for was social work.
Sure.
But it was a counseling program that was right down the road. But I think it was just kind of convenient. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, until I hit my internship, I was very committed to like no rooms with another person. I want this to be like in the community. And then I started internship and I said, only a room with another person. This is amazing. Sure. And so that's where I discovered my love of counseling. And I've been really passionate about it since then. But I think it was kind of a stumble upon, and it wasn't really my intention. Although looking back, I've always loved really focused, intentional conversation with people, especially when there's safety and freedom for them to share in a deeper way than they can somewhere else. So I think it was always there. I just didn't have the context or the words for it until later on.
Yeah, for sure. I was kind of similar in the sense that I went pre-med because I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I very much wanted the one room with one person and let's just talk.
So that was your vision. Okay.
And I had no idea that psychiatry was like so medicine based. So I thought that's what psychiatry was. And then as I got into my undergrad, I was like, oh, wait, like counseling's the thing that I want to be doing, not psychiatry. So it is one of those, I think there's like, you see like TV therapists, and that's not really what therapy's like, but the field itself doesn't maybe do a great job of saying like, hey, this is what like therapy is, or this is what counseling is, because the academic course to get there is, I feel like a lot of us kind of stumble into it realizing this is what we want to do. We just didn't know what it was called.
Right. Yes. Yeah, totally.
So you then did counseling from that point on, or did you bounce around with agency work, or kind of what was your
Yeah.
journey once you got into the field?
Yeah, so I graduated, and so previous to doing my master's in marriage and family therapy is what I ended up doing. I actually did a lot of traveling and lived overseas for a number of years, and I still really had this intense draw overseas.
Sure.
And I was unsure of what that looked like going forward. So I got married in between my undergrad and my master's, but my husband also had kind of a draw overseas as well. And both of us really interested specifically in the Middle East. So
Sure.
both of us had traveled and lived in the region independently of each other before getting married. And so I finished my counseling degree. He finished his degree, and we say, well, actually, at the time that we were studying, the Syrian crisis was at its peak, and our city actually hosted a large number of Syrian refugees. And so both of us had studied Arabic previous to that, and so we were actually quite involved in some like a volunteer settlement work, which we really, really enjoyed. And I actually thought initially I was going to do mental health related to refugees.
Sure.
And so, but we decided that we're never going to be this flexible again. So we decided to actually move to Jordan in the Middle East and study Arabic. So I didn't actually work as a counselor for about a year and a half after graduation. And instead, I was living in Amman, Jordan, and a full-time language student. So I wasn't sure at that time what counseling was going to look like for me. But we decided that we're going to be in language school until we couldn't afford it anymore. And so we were going to focus on it. So we'll move there. We'll make a life there to the best of our ability. We'll go to school until it doesn't make sense anymore financially. If we have jobs, we'll stay. And if we don't, we'll see it as a great life experience, something that equips us better in Canada, and come back to Canada and see where life leads us. We ended up staying for 3 years. And so we spent the first 10 months there, I think, doing full-time language, where that was like our job, was to study Arabic. And then I ended up getting a job at a group practice, kind of like a group practice where we're all independent. So we like work under the same roof, but we're all private practice. And so I actually never worked in an agency. I went straight to private practice, but I felt like it was a really good option because I was around other clinicians who were already established in private practice. And there was such a need for English speaking therapists in Jordan that they were basically like, here's all the paperwork, here's everything you need to start seeing clients. So I never had that like starting from absolute scratch feeling, which looking back, I'm like, that was such a score, because I absorbed all of their wait lists. So I basically had a private practice dropped on my lap from therapists who were just like, hallelujah, someone to relieve some of this stress from us. And then they provided supervision and peer consultation and support. And so I did that for a bit over 2 years. And that was my first outside of internship outside of graduation counseling experience. So a little different.
That is a little different. And I think you're my first international guest. So we're also getting to talk not just Canada international, but actual international.
Right. Yeah, I do both.
The Middle East.
Yeah.
So then what was if you don't mind me asking, what was the transition back to Canada like?
Yeah, so we actually came to this point where we're like, either we make a long-term life here, or we transition back to Canada. So for the years that we were in Jordan, it was kind of like, let's do it for another year. Okay, let's do it for another year. And every year is kind of like this like reevaluation of, is this still worth it? Is this still working for us? And so we came to this point of, either we dive in fully, we like start a family here, we, maybe buy property or just do something longer term, or it's time to kind of exit out, because that year by year works when you're like in your late 20s, but as you get older, but then we were like, you know what, we kind of want something more stable than this, and we're looking for starting a family. So we decided to transition back to Canada, because we've always had two streams of interest. One being travel, living internationally, kind of a broad worldview development, and a desire to really know people of other places and everything that goes along with that. But then there's also been this other really strong draw between my spouse and I towards the land and towards farming and growing our own food and regenerative agricultural techniques, that kind of thing. So we always thought somewhere in our soul that we would eventually go back to Canada and buy land and try to grow all of our own food. But like, we weren't sure when or how, and we're kind of like, but we also love this like traveling thing, and we love the open-mindedness of it, and the being able to experience so many amazing things in the world. But we felt like it was time. So we anticipated actually traveling for 5 months to all of these really far away places that we always wanted to go. And we had this 5-month itinerary set up that I was actually going to counsel on the road, which I had done a little bit of. So kind of like nomadic counseling. There's like a whole network of counselors who actually travel and counsel along the way and fund their travel. So I was going to do that, and then COVID happened. So it wasn't because of COVID that we came home, but it did impact when we did come home. So we were intending to leave Jordan May of 2020, and then travel over the summer, and then return back in the fall, I think was our itinerary, or what we thought. Then COVID, and then we ended up getting stuck in Jordan until August of that same year. So Jordan went into military lockdown, and the airport closed, and it was just a really strange time for everyone. And so we just stayed in our apartment that we'd been living in for a couple of years. It wasn't that we were living in a hotel, or, it was actually really fine, because that was our home. Our friends are there. Everything was there. We just extended it. So we returned back to Canada August 2020, and I had already been online before COVID, but because of COVID, it pushed me to go fully online. And that actually really served me when I came back to Canada, because I was able to bring my clients back to Canada with me. And so I arrived in Canada and took a month off, and then I had about a half to 3/4 time full counseling practice right off the bat, which was great.
So I have a bunch of questions, because this is a fascinating story. So one of the themes that sounds really great, and you're coming from a marriage and family background, and so do I. That's my licensure. But it seems like you and your spouse did a really good job of kind of like planning together and checking in with each other and making these plans with one another. Was there other support as you were traveling, or was it just kind of like the two of you, us against the world mentality?
It was mostly the two of us. We had support in the form of like really good friends along the way. Actually, I would say that's the biggest loss since coming back to Canada is our friend group that we made overseas. So in Jordan, other places in the world where our friends have moved to from Jordan. But no, we didn't have like official support. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like we
Yeah.
weren't under an organization that was kind of leading us doing these things. We were independent of anything, making decisions on behalf of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a bunch of great communication happening
totally.
to be able to do that. And then something like COVID hit, and just to kind of be able to roll with it and say, like, it's okay, we're fine. Like, we can do this and adjust our plans and it'll be all right.
Yeah, there were definitely some challenging times in there.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, it was all right, but it, as everyone experienced during those uncertain times, it can be really tough to not know what's going to happen, next week, let alone you have a flight booked in 2 months. Is that flight actually going to happen? And if it doesn't, what do you do? And then you need to sell all your stuff, and how to, like, what decisions to make when. That does definitely take a toll. And I think when my spouse and I look back on those times, probably the hardest times that we've been through as a couple. But at the same time, we did do what we needed to do to make it through. And for that, I feel really proud.
Yeah. You're, like I said before, you are my first international guest. What are the rules and regulations around doing telehealth in Canada? Is it the whole country's available? Is it a province-based thing? How does that kind of look?
Yeah, so it's provincial. So, but the thing is that not every province is regulated. So I happen to come from an unregulated province. So on one hand, lack of regulations doesn't protect the public as much as if it was regulated. On the other hand, it provides a lot of flexibility to be able to provide specialized services to more people than just those in my province. So, so because my province isn't regulated, I'm part of the national system. So the CCPA, the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. So I'm still under an association. I'm not provincially regulated. So as a result, I'm able to see clients in other non-regulated provinces, which there are several, as well as certain provinces have regulation, but it's not for the action of counseling, it's for the titles that you use as a counselor.
Sure. Yep.
So as long as I don't use those titles or advertise in those provinces, I see clients there. Yeah. So different counselors might see that differently. Yeah. I guarantee you that there will be Canadian counselors, if they listen to this, saying, no, you shouldn't do that. But I think that there's multiple ways to consider how these regulations work. So so that's where I'm at. And then internationally, my liability insurance covers me as long as I'm following the licensure laws of the country of the client.
Sure. Yeah.
So as a result, I don't see clients in America because I cannot satisfy their licensure requirements.
We have too many rules and regulations around it.
Exactly. Like if I moved there, my education would eventually and probably enable me to get licensed in whichever state I was in. So it's not necessarily because my education isn't on par. It's just the ways that that regulation works there.
Right. Yeah. No, it's still weird. I mean, I tend to say psychology as a field is usually like 20 years behind. Just like where research and things are, but also like technology. Like COVID was wild. I was working in higher ed still. And like all the kids just went home like over a weekend. And it was like, we're like scrambling
and what do you do?
The counselors to be like, okay, we have kids from all over the country now. We're not technically allowed to see them because we're not licensed in those states. And yet like they left this weekend. Like there was no time to set up follow up or like transition care or anything. And a lot of states
need mental health services.
Right. And I was working with just student athletes. So that was my whole population. And so they're all losing their sport, which is their biggest stress relief. And so like there's nothing going on. They're home randomly. They don't have their team. They don't have their stress relief. So like I'm working on like, okay, this state relaxed and this state relaxed, but this one isn't yet. And so there was a lot of reciprocity that came out of that that then has slowly gone away. And it's such a like frustrating kind of thing to say like this, the regulations, I agree, protect the client from getting scammed or working with somebody who's maybe not qualified, but also it's so limiting for providers to not be able to say like, here's someone who I could work with. I have their specialty that they need. And because of geography, I can't help them.
Yeah. If I was only able to see clients in my province, so I come from a quite rural province that doesn't have a very large population, I wouldn't be specializing in what I specialize in, because I don't think that there would be enough people looking for it. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's because of the openness and the flexibility that I'm able to specialize. And I think that the specialization that I do is very needed. And I'm glad to be able to serve a wider demographic. So for internationally, I do a bit of research if a client comes from a different country that I've never worked with before into what are the legislation laws there. I'm part of a network of international therapists. So basically therapists from so many countries. So I just go on there and be like, hey, licensure laws in Switzerland. Is there anything legally, keeping me from seeing this client? And majority of the time, people will say only if they want to use their local insurance, you wouldn't be covered. So if they're willing to pay privately, we don't care who they choose to see. That's kind of up to them. So except for the US. The US is a standout in the whole world when it comes to
our insurance is a nightmare to begin with. So
so then I just have to be careful of the type of clients I bring, right? So I'm really careful about risk assessing, and I'm very specific of the appropriate types of clients who I can see internationally because of lack of access to emergency care if that ever came up.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's segue. Let's talk about specialty a little bit. We've got some overlap. That's how I think we connected in the first place. So working with religious trauma is one of your specialties. I'm assuming, filling in some blanks here, that was what you were saying with being able to reach a wider group of clients outside of just your more rural province. And I think that's really interesting around religious trauma, because I'm in Wisconsin. I'm the only provider in the state who has any sort of certification around religious trauma. Not that I'm the only person who advertises that I work with it, but nobody else has any sort of actual formal certification for it. And it is still pretty rare. I mean, a lot of states, at least in my geographic area, have one, maybe two providers who have a background in it, who have specialized training in it. So I think it's definitely needed, but as a niche, it's growing in the profession, but it's still quite small.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been amazing to be able to provide like a service that people find me from all over the place, and they were just Googling online, and I put a lot of effort into being like findable online. And instead of me having to kind of like try to stand out amongst other counselors, it's like they come to me saying, I already want to buy what you're selling. How can I convince you to work with me? Which is wild, like really different. And so from that, I've started growing my practice, because I can't serve everyone who comes through my door. And also there's different needs of people who are wanting to process religious trauma and harm, as well as deconstruction. And then I'm starting to get more into cult recovery as well. So I'm wanting to position myself also for cult, ex-cult members. So I'm starting to have people seek me out in that way as well, which is overlaps religious trauma, but it also has other dynamics that I think are really important. So that's been really fun. So currently I run a group practice. There are 3 of us right now, but I'm wanting to take on students. And one thing I want to do in the next year or so is to get my supervision certification. And so start supervising interns or student counselors who are wanting to work in the religious trauma field, so that we can have more counselors
Right.
and therapists in the field,
Yeah.
right? And then grow my practice, or they go out and do the work somewhere else as well.
Sure. And that I think is where the field is often behind, because we have all this research that's saying people are leaving religion at a rapid rate right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do not have providers to
Yes.
work with all those people. So I think it's something that will continue to grow in the field. What was kind of the process for you? Your undergrad was in religious studies, and then what was kind of that process and international travel and all these other pieces, but like to get into working with religious trauma then?
Absolutely. Well, there's kind of the personal side of being raised in a religious environment, and in my adulthood kind of coming to this place of not aligning with that any longer, and going through that process of like, who am I? What are the impacts of this religious upbringing? And then what do I want as an adult? Yep. And that's really difficult, isn't it? That that's not always a straightforward path or an easy path. And then there's the whole family systems aspect of it, right? Like it's disruptive of your family system and working through that. And so I experienced that myself. And then there's the professional side that I'm in Jordan, which is 97.5% Muslim. And there's a Christian minority as well. And I realized that, man, I love working with people who come from a religious family or come from a religious context, and within counseling feel freedom to question it. Yeah. And whatever that looks like for them, whether they're attempting to leave or whether it's just for the first time in my life, I can question these beliefs without any kind of repercussions, or it doesn't hold, like my family's not going to turn on me, or it's not going to, frame me in a certain way within my community, and providing space for that. And then the deep work that people would do in that safe space. So I did a lot of thinking and work around like the ideal clients, which clients give me energy, which ones kind of leech energy. And I kind of came to see that it's like the more existential type clients that I like to work with, and less in mental health crises, more in that place of like, who am I? So identity work and exploring what they really want in life, and then what to do about that, right? What to do about it when there's this gulf between how they were raised, or kind of those roles that they play, and then who they actually want to be and who they know that they are. So I do a lot of work with people in that vocationally. Maybe they work for a ministry of some sort. I work with a lot of deconstructing missionaries who are on the field, but just kind of being like, I've kind of changed, like, what do I do about this? Because my whole career is based on this ideal that I no longer hold. Yet here I am on the field with my family, supported by all these churches and, that type of thing. And then I also work with quite a few Christians, Muslims, but other religions as well, who come from contexts that are not affirming of sexuality and gender, and really admitting for the first time that they're gay or lesbian, or not the gender that they've presented as their entire life, and what to do about that, what to do now, and how to function. So a lot of those kinds of questions come up, which I love working with. It's such a privilege to hold that space, and that's what really keeps me going. And then the theological side, what do I believe about God, the universe, myself within it? Do I believe those things? If I don't believe them, how do I rebuild that? If I've my entire life, my entire socialization, my entire lived experience has been assuming that the world is turning due to this all-powerful being. And if I come to the place that I don't actually think that anymore, how do I go through life? What does that even, there's a lot of grief and a lot of loss, right? A lot of loss of certainty and sitting with all of the emotions that come up. So there's that inner work as well as the external implications of all those things as well.
Yeah.
You relate to that?
I do. No,
Yeah.
and
I just kind of get on the soapbox. I'm like, this is awesome work. It's really great.
I do. For me, it's my timeline was I think more stretched out because I think my deconstruction took a long time. Because I was occupying this space while I was still identifying as a Christian. It was very liberal and very progressive. And so I was the therapist who worked at a Christian counseling place, but was like safe for LGBTQ people. I was the therapist who like teens would come out to me. How do I tell my parents? And that was a lot of the work that I was doing. I have the family therapy background. And then when I went into higher ed, I was working with student athletes, and there's a high percentage of student athletes who are LGBTQ. And so this idea of like, okay, we're in this space. I was at a Christian college. So we're in this space that like, I can't be myself on campus, but people on my team know they love me, they support me, but I can't like say something in class, or I can't, So I spent a lot of time kind of convincing myself that like I was providing an important service in the Christian community, and got to a point where it's like, right, but like it's not healthy for me to be in the Christian community either.
Okay.
Because I think but I was so, I don't want to say focused, but I kind of kept convincing myself of like, but if I'm not here, who's doing this work for these people who need it?
Yeah.
Who's the safe space if I'm not here? Without kind of identifying like, oh yeah, it's just like sucking energy out of me to be the person on campus who's writing strongly worded letters and advocating for safe spaces, and like getting told I can't put like a rainbow flag up in my office, and like having all these battles so that the kids didn't have to have them, but then being like, right, but it's taking a toll on me too. So and then it was kind of like, then it was this deconstruction that had taken 20 years for me, like hit overnight, where it's just like, right, I don't believe this stuff. And I haven't for years. I've just still been identifying that way. And then it was kind of like cleaning up of like all that existential work that you're talking about. Like, okay, if I don't believe that, like, that's not really a definition of who I am now. It's what now what? Because it's kind of like almost like a blank slate, but it's also can be really overwhelming because there's so many options all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy that work. For me, it was such a uplifting process. Like it was so much weight was just instantly removed because I was raised fundamentalist, very like biblical literalist. So Earth was created in 6 days. It's 6,000 years old. Questioning anything sends you to hell forever. Like all this stuff. So like when I finally like let go of it, I was like, oh, this is like so much better.
And realized, wow, I'm fine.
Yeah. And so like that experience with people, whether it's same as what you're talking about, whether they're deconstructing or not, like I'm not pushing anything. I don't have an agenda. Some of them are trying to find a more progressive or a more liberal religion, or a group that has maybe more inclusivity built into it. And like, that's great. Like finding a way for people to feel more congruent in their spirituality, I think is super important. It's work that I look back and I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time. I just like was holding myself back, still identifying as a Christian, because that values-based stuff and that identity work is all stuff that I've also very much enjoyed. I do look a little bit like a hippie. So I drew a lot of like agnostic types, even when I was still identifying even when I still worked at a Christian counseling place. People were finding me to be like, oh, he might be a safe space to have some of these conversations. Some people just came to see me because like, oh, he looks like he smokes weed, so I bet we can talk about that. But similarly to you, like I had a job offer straight out of grad school before I was graduated because I'm a male marriage therapist, which in this area is a rarity. So
something I'm trying to hire.
Yeah, because there are not like, it's a female dominated profession, one of the few, and then couples counseling specifically. So I've definitely like the religious trauma thing for me was important to get a specialty so that I could work in it, because I'm passionate about it. But couples is still like very much my bread and butter, just because I'm a male marriage therapist, which a lot of guys are still like, if I have to go to counseling, I want to go see a dude. So
That's interesting because I'm also coming from a marriage and family therapy background, but I don't do couples work or family work.
Yeah. Well, and it's wild to me because some of the people who I've interviewed already or will be interviewing are also LMFTs and like don't do couples work. And that's what I love. It's like that's what my first experience
That's amazing.
seeing a session behind a one-way mirror was a couple, and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so it's just like really affirming once I finally found this path to be like, yeah, this is what I want.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a bunch of MFTs who don't they like the theory behind it, they like the ideas around systems work, but they don't like having more than one person in the room.
I don't even identify as an MFT because it's not really as big of a thing in Canada. I identify as a Canadian certified counselor, which is more recognized, and people know what I'm saying when I say that. So
I think, and this might be me making stuff up, so you can correct me. I think the Canadian and international in general education system is a little bit more broad, and so like I have my I went the LPC route and then got the MFT on top of it, and I just don't keep my LPC. I never kept it. I just did the MFT thing. So I had both trainings, but like, there's a handful of master's programs in the United States, but not very many that do marriage and family. So that was not a thing I was aware of until I was already in grad school. So then I had to go and do my post-grad after that right away.
Okay. Yeah. Talking about specialization, it's been interesting to see how many people come through my door who are so happy to find a therapist who understands the religious aspect, but isn't a Christian counselor or isn't coming from a religious form of counseling at all. And so I try really hard to be able to straddle I'm a secular therapist. I'm fully committed to everything in the secular therapy realm. And I understand the dynamics within religious contexts, but not from a place of I have some sort of mandate to keep you in that religion or help you work it out in a way that you can stay. It's a very much I understand it for the purposes of making it so that you don't have to explain it all to me,
Well, and
where I can kind of hold a posture that you don't have to convince me that it's not just the same as believing in Santa Claus when you're little, because I've had people come, it's like they tell me experiences of their past therapist who tried really hard to get it. They just didn't because they never lived in that context. So to them, it's just so foreign.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, I talked about this is an ongoing theme with the therapists who I talk about religious trauma with, is like that lived experience is hard to put into context. Like I'm, I don't know, 4th or 5th generation fundamentalist. So like, that's all I ever knew. Like it wasn't a come to Jesus moment. I didn't convert later in life. Like it's just all I knew. And so like, you don't realize how culty it is until you're out of it and look back and kind of say like, oh yeah, that's not normal or healthy. Like that's not, but yeah, it is hard, I think. And a lot of, for me, my marketing is still, I don't know, not perfect, I guess, because I still get people who are coming to get like the faith affirmation of like
I get that too still.
Yeah.
I don't know. What on my website communicated that to you?
I tried
hard not to. Yeah.
Forrest Benedict, who I interviewed earlier, talks about he and I were doing a group and we kept getting, it's for people recovering from purity culture. And we kept getting guys who were still in purity culture looking for like help avoiding porn. And we're like, no, this is not the group for you. And like just picking the language to try and communicate like, this is, it's hard. But I think it's weird. It's jargony because when you're in a religion, you have certain jargon. So you use that as a therapist to communicate, I understand, but then it sometimes draws people who are still in it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I do work with people who are still in it because I'm committed to meeting them where they're at.
Right.
At the same time, I do have to walk that line of like, what, are there ways that I'm presenting that are inaccurate that maybe would set them up to feel disappointed in the future if they were to find out?
Yeah.
So trying to not have any sort of, so try to be all forward, right?
Right.
And if they choose to continue to come to me, that's their choice, as long as they know that I don't come from this background or from the, I'm not looking to impose a certain end on them.
Yeah.
But if being congruent for them means staying in it, hopefully we can do some work of like what that looks like to be healthier than they were before if they choose to stay in it. Right.
Yeah. And
but every now and then I'll get like a parent of a teenager who thinks that I'm like that Christian counselor who's going to keep their teenager on like the Christian straight and narrow. And I definitely have to be super honest about that, because
well, and I
one thing for a parent on behalf of their teenager, it's another thing for an adult on behalf of themselves.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I have the experience of like deconverting after I've been in the profession. So a lot of people knew me or knew of me while I was still working in the Christian space. So that's been like, being very clear with like expectations and making sure it's a good fit, making sure I know what they're trying to accomplish and that there's not any sort of false expectations around like, are you going to pray every session? Like, no, I didn't do that even when I identified as a Christian. That's not ethical. But like, so some of those
it's interesting to navigate.
Yeah, it is for sure. So fast forwarding, we jumped all over the place. This is my ADHD coming through. You are doing the homesteading, regenerative agriculture, like you're set up now where you're totally telehealth and you're doing this other passion that you have. Tell me about how that you went back to Canada during COVID and what, like just bought a farm right then?
No, we went back to Canada, lived in one of the cities in my province, Saskatoon. Okay. So I live in Saskatchewan and north of North Dakota. And we thought that we were actually going to continue to live in the city and maybe do like urban something, converting backyards to food, that type of thing. And then over time just realized, hey, we actually really want to be like on a property somewhere. Yeah. So we ended up, long story made short, we ended up buying a 22.5 acre old farmyard about an hour and a half outside of this city. So it took us until we took possession October 2021. So it took us that amount of time to find it, eventually, go through everything that's required in privately buying land. And so, we've been here since October 2021. And is it 2021 or 2022? 2021. It's been like a year and a half that we've been here. Yeah. And so it's an old farmyard. It's about 120 years old. The same family has lived on the yard ever since the beginning. And so it's a lot of cleanup, a lot of old buildings, old house that we're renovating. And it's been awesome so far. Yeah. A lot of work. My clients don't typically realize, like I talk about it if it comes up a little bit, but they don't realize that I actually do all of my business and my counseling work from a container or a sea can. Do you know what that is?
Like a shipping container.
Shipping container, yeah. That's on the property that's been converted into an office. And it was actually here when we bought the property, and I bought it from the previous owner. And so it's located right between an old barn and our chicken coop. So every morning I walk about 50 meters from our front door. I sometimes have to snowshoe it, or I walk in like heavy snow, because this is Canada. And but it's fully finished and furnished. And so I love it because I really appreciate the work-life balance of providing services outside of my house, but at the same time not having to commute somewhere, as well as pay rent somewhere else as a therapist as well. And then the natural setting is so great. So like if I ever do phone sessions, I'll go sit in a chair right in front of my big south-facing window and watch my chickens running around outside, and it's great. So my other half of my life is like I see my clients, I run my business, and then I'm raising chickens. We're wanting to get some pigs in the future. We have a big garden. We try to preserve as much as we can. This past winter, we ate our own food that we've grown ourselves probably until about 2 months ago. So,
Nice.
so that's pretty satisfying to do.
Yeah. So is that like self-care for you then? Is that kind of like after a long day of sessions or a couple of stressful cases, is it like to go walk the property, or is it like you're going to go do some gardening? Is that like your stress relief?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, and I'm realizing how important it is as time goes on, that it's definitely a part of my mental health maintenance, and a really important part of creating a lifestyle that's conducive to being healthy for me. So so I'm constantly doing yard work or walking with my dogs. In the wintertime, I have kind of a snowshoe route that I do around the property.
Sure.
There's also a lot of work, right? There's the like kind of like, wow, so wonderful. And then there's also the like 35-degree days that you're butchering chickens and like drenched in sweat, that's another side of it.
For sure.
There's aspects that aren't that fun, but overall it's a lifestyle that we really value, and it feels good to be living it.
Yeah. And it sounds like an awesome, like, your values, you're living your values through your practice, you're living your values through where you're living, the geography, and kind of that lifestyle. So like that very much practicing what you preach probably to your clients around what's your identity, what holds value, what holds meaning to you.
Yeah. And intentionality towards creating that life for yourself.
Yeah.
At the same time, I recognize the privilege that I have, that I'm able to create that reality for myself. I recognize that it isn't always that straightforward for everyone.
Right. Yeah. I think I work with a number of other professionals, and this is a conversation we have a lot around like self-care. And I'm always like, not to put like my practice on a pedestal, but like owning my own practice has been wonderful for my mental health after working at other practices or working for people who I wasn't aligned with ethically. So yeah, just having that ability to be at a place where like you're valuing the things that are important to you, that in and of itself does wonders. And then living out in nature. I'm sure there are downsides. I'm a city person, but we have a pretty big garden for being in the city, and it's like I love it at the start of the season, and then by the end of the season, I'm like, man, all these mosquitoes out here, and so,
totally.
But, all right, so shifting topics again. What's on the bookshelf? What are you reading? What's kind of like been holding your attention lately?
Great question.
Or watching. I don't know if you're a reader or a...
I recently read the book Cultish by Amanda Montell, and led a discussion for a book club around it. So very interesting book. Have you read it? Are you familiar with it?
I have not. I've seen it around. It has not quite made it onto my bookshelf yet. It's been on my list of things to get to.
Yeah. Gives me a lot to think about around places where I've existed. And I look back, I'm like, that was a little bit cultish. Like, I wouldn't say it was a cult, but it has some of those cult-like ways of using language. And I really enjoyed that book. A lot to think about. What am I reading these days? I feel like I go through phases where I read a lot of psychology, therapist related books, or watch different documentaries around cults or around, religious trauma or this or that. And then I feel like I need to put it away for a while, that I shouldn't be spending every Saturday watching like Wild Wild Country or something like that. Right. Although my like fascination, like the fascination part of my brain is like sucked right in. I realize that I have to do my best to separate work learning from just what I watch on an evening or consume, and just because if I just let my interests go, it will always, not always, but typically lead me to something that is fascinating, and it's okay to be fascinated by it, but also quite heavy and dark, and then leaving me feeling exhausted and tired, and like I didn't really take a mental break from my clients that day.
Yeah, for sure. I think similar. So I'm a similar way, where a lot of the things around religious trauma are really fascinating for me. And in America, you know, we have all these regressive laws that are trying to be forced through and things. So it's one of those things where working with clients that I'm working with, especially members of the LGBTQ community, like I'm working really hard to support them and stay informed of what's going on, the stressors that are affecting them, but also like that's draining. And so being able to say like, okay, like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't go watch this documentary on, you know, this cult from the 80s or whatever, because my brain's interested in it, but like, that's maybe not the best way to do stress relief. So I think being intentional around those things is really important.
Yeah. I've found myself getting quite affected by what's on Instagram and like Facebook groups for ex-evangelicals or places like that, and finding myself needing to pull away a bit. Like there was a while there where I joined everything and read everything, and I think it was important for that period of time. It was kind of like market research of what are the conversations that are going on, who are the voices, and I think it's really important to continue to know the cultural happenings and what's going on at Bethel or what's going on at Hillsong, or, you know, all those things. But there also comes a time where it starts to affect my own mental health and keep me in that place of anger and kind of outrage that isn't sustainable, right? And I think as part of the deconstruction process, feeling anger is absolutely an important part of that process. But I think online, it's the people who are in that phase that are there, right? And I absolutely support them to say what they need to say to get it out. But for my own mental health, I have to limit how much I engage in or absorb. And as a therapist, I almost feel like I need to save that for my clients. Like I need to save that for them and not necessarily give that energy to random people on the internet who haven't asked me for it.
No, I get that. I think that's an important thing to talk about and like acknowledge that there's the work that we like to do is important to us. And so our brains light up on it, but also like engaging in it in our free time, endlessly being with it affects the work that we do with our clients too. So I'm like that. I have my, you know, I like pro wrestling, and I've gotten comfortable as an adult admitting that to people because it is a frowned upon thing. But it's like my it's like my trashy. Other people watch trashy reality or dating shows or whatever. It's like my guilty pleasure. Like turn my brain off, not think about global warming or cults or any of that stuff, and just like decompress. So I think that's really important. I think like we as therapists and professionals, helping professionals, have to be aware of stuff like that, of like, where do you actually decompress instead of just, it's not your client, but you're engaging in the same work.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's nerdy gardening things that I I'm also quite frugal, and I enjoy learning like ways to do things myself that you typically pay for in the stores. So like, you know, I make sourdough, and like I enjoy researching all of that stuff and then carrying it out, and I feel really good when I'm doing that. So you're totally right that as therapists, I think it's so important to know what actually brings you energy and be doing those regularly. Like those shouldn't be the exception. You know, like I go on vacation, you know, twice a year, and that's when I do those things. It's like, no, like that should be part of your maybe unrealistically daily rhythm, but it shouldn't be a once in a blue moon type of thing that you kind of like fill up from the very bottom. It should be like a continuous kind of, you know, trickle in.
I talk about stress relief probably being a daily practice that people need to be in, but then like cultivating joy. And those are different
Yeah.
things. I think our society has conflated them in an unfortunate way, where people think that like, oh, I did this as stress relief, so that's good. And it's like, yeah, but like, where are you like actually recharging? Where are you investing in the happiness and joy in your life instead of just managing your stress? Like those are different things.
Those are different. Yeah. When I first got, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when I first got back to Canada, I felt like I just had this like endless pit of, of lack of taking care of myself. Mm-hmm. And so in that, and it was COVID, so there were limitations of what I could do, but what I could do was a solo camp. So I did a ton of solo hiking and camping by myself, which was awesome. And I don't really feel the need to do that as much anymore because I live on a property. It just feels like I get that elsewhere. But at that time, that was so therapeutic and amazing.
Yeah. Very cool. So Kelsey, this has been great. Super enjoyable. I think very relatable to a lot of people. Some of these themes, when I'm talking, especially to therapists who work with religious trauma, are going to keep popping up because I think it's such a shared experience. But if people want to find out more about you, about the work and the practice that you run, where can they find you?
For sure. My website is called, my business is called Find Your Way Counseling. And that's counseling with 2 L's, according to the Canadian spelling.
The Canadian spelling.
Yeah, and the British spelling.
Yeah.
And so you can find me there. I'm on Instagram and I'm kind of on YouTube, but that's kind of latent right now. I am going to be on maternity leave from the beginning of June until probably early 2024 or later. So I'm not currently taking new clients, but I have colleagues who work in Find Your Way who still work in this work with religious trauma, and they're available. So that's where we can be found. Yeah.
And congrats about the baby, and super
Thank
awesome.
you.
2 thumbs up about taking time away and actually enjoying raising a family. I have 2 little boys and love it. And my wife gets to stay home this year and has just absolutely enjoyed spending time with our 2-year-old. Our older one is in school now, but I think it's awesome and wonderful to be in a place where you can do that. It's so great. I love being a parent. So enjoy that process.
Thank you.
You won't sleep very much, but it's still, it's still super enjoyable. The brain,
will be great parts of it.
The brain blocks that stuff out, and then you like convince yourself that you can have another one. So no, but seriously, congrats. And I think too, that's like really awesome boundaries to be having, of saying like, nope, this is a chapter of my life where I'm doing this thing and I can step away from work, and that's okay. And it's good and healthy and wonderful. So fantastic. So on Instagram, website, your colleagues who are also working in the same things, covering for you while you're on maternity leave, which also is great. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I thought it was a great chat.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah. And thank you everyone who is listening. We very much appreciate the listens. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on all the places. I'm the host, Jeremy. You can find all my information and social media and all that jazz over at wellnesswithjared.com. And we will be back next week with another episode. Take care, everyone.